I'm back with some more comments from my TikToks. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss a single video. I'm Jenefer, I'm the founder of Silk Helix, and we help businesses with all things HR, people management and employment law. I've got a number of digital courses, check out the details in the description. And if you want to find my TikTok where these are all originating from, details are on screen now. Now this comment feels like it's come from a disgruntled employee. All my workplace is bothered about is letting me know that I won't get paid and I'll be getting a verbal warning. Oh dear, that's not great, is it? When you're off sick, the last thing that you want to hear is you'll be getting a verbal warning. Now, sometimes we have to do this. So I have some empathy for the management or the HR in this person's employment, because we have to tell people if they're not going to get paid. So if they've reached the end of their statutory sick pay, if they're dropping from full pay to statutory sick pay, we need to let people know that. I also recognise that that's not a nice letter to be getting when you're already sick and now you've got a financial worry as well. This is why communication is so important. It's why a random letter coming through somebody's door just to tell them that they're not going to get paid is horrible, and we need to have this regular communication so somebody knows that's coming, so that they also know that you're working with them, supporting them to try and get them back to work. It's also why good relationships are never going to get built while somebody's off sick, because they're already sick, and then that's not a good place for any of us to be, and then suddenly they've now got these financial worries because they're not going to get paid, and that's not good for anybody. So although I advise the business and I'm looking at things from a business point of view, we have to look at things from a human point of view as well. I mean, I don't want to be sat there with somebody who is really unwell and having to say, you're not going to get paid. It's horrible. And there are often other options for people. We are not trained to advise on things like the benefit system, but there are options available to people. And that, again, a reason that we put these things into writing is so that people are much more likely to be able to access those other places where they can get financial support from. But it is really important that we have communication so that people don't suddenly get a letter. Also, you're going to get a verbal warning. Okay, so a verbal warning, if a company is still using verbal warnings, because many are not, the ACAS Code of Conduct no longer requires us to use a verbal warning. We can go straight into a written warning. A verbal warning is kind of meaningless because any formal warning has to be in writing, and any formal warning has to follow a formal process, which would be a disciplinary process. You may call it a capability process. It ultimately follows the ACAS Code on disciplinary and grievance procedures. So it'll either be called a capability or disciplinary procedure, maybe a performance procedure. It doesn't really matter hugely what it's being called, but any warning's got to come from a formal procedure. Yes, there is going to be times where the absence is at a level that is too high and can't be accommodated by the business. And that's going to come from discussions, it's going to come from meetings. Now, if you don't partake in those discussions, those meetings, as an individual employee, then those meetings can happen without you. And we should be writing to employees to tell them that the meetings can happen without them. And again, this is why it's so important that managers have training so that they're not just suddenly blurting out things around pay or verbal warnings that they perhaps don't fully understand, or perhaps haven't built up the communication around it. So it just comes out really awfully to the individual, as opposed to a situation where maybe they understand that's what we've got to, that's kind of the last resort, and that's where we're at. So to me, this is why communication is so important, because otherwise, you get these essential letters come through the door and that you weren't expecting. So whilst these comments are often being used as evidence to support an argument that individuals shouldn't be expected to communicate, we have to communicate, and they're providing the evidence as to why often we need to communicate, but also why it needs to be done really well. And it's why my training doesn't just focus on HR and employment law, but also on how we communicate with people really well, because I think marrying those two together is so important. And it's also why I think dealing with absence training on its own is not hugely helpful and should be done alongside all of the other stuff, and particularly performance, communication, disciplinary procedures. All of that needs to feed into it, because your good relationships don't come when somebody's off sick. They come before that, which puts you in a better position to be able to deal with sickness when it does happen. Forgive the quick interruption to this video, and I will keep it really quick. If you've liked this video, found it useful, you can of course hit the subscribe button, but I also want to tell you about our digital courses. In our digital courses, I go into much more detail. The videos are very similar to these. It's me, it's on camera, but there's also downloads, there's sample forms, there's a few sample policies in there as well. All the things that you need to know. We've even got some coming where we've got live classes as well. So check out our digital courses. Details are on screen now and in the description below. Look forward to seeing you on one of our courses in the future, and in the meantime, I'll let you get back to the video. Okay, let me move on to the next comment. Okay, so this is a really interesting one. So this commenter says, I've been off sick since September due to extreme workplace stress. My GP is wonderful and has stated that work are not to contact me. So this person is saying their GP is wonderful. As a HR professional or a business owner, I'm not sure I would say this GP is wonderful. It's not particularly helpful, because if we can't make contact, how do we resolve the situation? And in fact, I have never come across a GP saying this in my experience. So in my experience, even when somebody is facing dismissal, so even when somebody's gone off work with work-related stress, because they are in a disciplinary procedure, and I do get that if you're in a disciplinary procedure, particularly for gross misconduct, that is going to be stressful. I can understand why you would be going off sick during that process. I understand it. It's not always the most helpful, but I do understand from an individual perspective why that would be an extremely stressful situation to be in. However, in my experience, most GPs say that work meetings can continue even though the person is not well enough to come to work. Work meetings, which are a different thing to being at work all day, can continue, and that once the situation is resolved, that will resolve the stress. That's often why the GPs will say that, because resolving the situation will resolve the stress. Even if somebody loses their job, it then puts somebody in a situation where they can look for another job. They can take positive steps in their life as opposed to being in a reactive situation. So in my experience, GPs don't say this, and I don't particularly think this is a helpful comment from a GP. That also said, GPs can make recommendations. So on the statement of fitness for work, GPs can say whether or not somebody is fit for work or not fit for work. If they say somebody is fit for work, they can make recommendations. I don't know where or how a GP would make a recommendation that somebody cannot be contacted, but either way, it would only be a recommendation. So a GP doesn't have a jurisdiction over an employer. A GP has no control, no say, no way of making an employer not make contact. So that's the GP bit, the second part of this comment. The first part is it's extreme workplace stress. Now, I do accept that extreme workplace stress is not a good place to be, and the communication has gone wrong. And this is why I say, and I'm going to say it again, no healthy relationship is ever going to be built once somebody is off sick. That has to be built before, and training your line managers will help to avoid this situation happening, because this is a mess. This situation is a mess. I don't know how it's going to resolve if nobody's willing to talk to each other. If this person is so stressed they cannot communicate, I don't know how the situation is going to resolve. Unfortunately, it may well get to the point where it resolves in the employee's absence, with letters going out saying that meetings will have to be held in their absence. We would invite them in those situations to put in written submissions so we can consider their point of view. Ideally, I would be not just looking at it as you're off sick, you're not capable of work. I'd be looking at what's causing the workplace stress. Can we fix this? Is there a way to resolve it? Often once somebody's gone, it's got that far that somebody's off sick, it's really hard to resolve and going to be really, really problematic too. Often it's gone too far and it's going to take a lot of unpicking to get it better. But that's where I'd be starting with this, of looking at, okay, so what is causing the stress and how are we going to resolve this? Now, if there's any hints or clues that somebody's getting to the point of being stressed at work, don't ignore it, don't write it off. This is why we need to deal with things, and it's why we need to make sure that we're on top of actually supporting and managing people so that they don't get to this stage. And yeah, why training managers is so important. And I keep saying it, I say it over and over again. But if an employer contacted me for advice right now on this situation, the person who's already off sick with stress, they're telling us we can't contact them, it's a mess. And it's going to be really hard to unpick and fix. And I'd be saying, actually, what we should have been looking at this months ago, presumably this has been a build-up for some time, would be my guess. We should be looking at it back then, and we should have been avoiding getting to this place, because that's going to be far easier than trying to unpick it now that we've got to this place. If you are an employer and you receive this and a GP is saying you can't contact, it's a recommendation, there's nothing else. The only way that we can get situations where somebody can't make contact is court order that says that somebody's not allowed to contact us. I've never come across that happening from an employee to an employer. Ultimately, if an employee doesn't want to be contacted by the employer, they need to resign. They need to walk away from the situation and leave the situation, because if you stay employed, then a resolution has got to come, which is either return to work, we resolve whatever's causing the stress, we return to work, or you get to a point of a dismissal. They're kind of the only three options at this point, and some kind of communication's got to happen somewhere along the line. It may feel wonderful to this individual, and I can imagine the stress that this individual is under, and I don't take that lightly. That to get to that point, you can tell something quite serious has happened, but we do need some form of communication to be able to deal with it, and certainly if you are an employer in this situation, then you need to be taking advice right now. But for those that have not reached this situation, get your managers trained, understand what you can do in employment law, understand how we communicate with people, how you get the best out of people, how you motivate people, how you avoid absence. Do all the right things every day, and you won't get to this point. This is rare. I don't see many employers that get to this point, but clearly not nice for the individual involved. If you're still watching at this point, thank you for watching. Check out these videos, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.